Hello and welcome to this Climate Salad Lunch and Learn, how to pitch to an investor with an actual real life investor, Lisa Fedorenko from Albert's Impact Investing Office. My name is Charlotte. I am on a call right now, Finn. My name is Charlotte and I look after the community here at Climate Salad. And I also have a son who isn't well and at home and got a whoopee cushion for his birthday and likes to use it. So I'm just prefacing it with that, but I'll have the mic off a fair bit. Lisa, I'm going to hand over to you. But before I do, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, that's the Gubbi Gubbi people. Wanya Nullam, welcome. I honour their continuous connection to country, land and sea and pay my respects to their elders past, present and joining us today. I am also a huge supporter of The Voice and actively working on a reconciliation action plan and happy to share learnings about that as well. Lisa, can I hand over to you now?
I love that introduction. I acknowledge I'm on Gadigal land here and would love to learn what you're saying about The Voice. I'm a big supporter too. Thank you everyone for joining and welcome. I'm going to try and keep this as interactive as possible and highly encourage you to view this as almost an Ask Me Anything. So the side of the table I normally sit at is the investor side, and I have many founders come and pitch for ideas. We're an impact investor. One of the areas we look at is climate. I'll tell you a little bit about Albert's, and then I'll walk you through some of what to expect to in terms of pitching to an impact investor. And I've also got a little demo deck of what a founder pitch might look like. So trying to put some empathy in what it's like in your shoes and walk you through some common pitfalls which we see in pitch decks, which are often your first impression to a fund. And yeah, highly encourage you to ask questions as we go along. And if you've got anything which you'd like to take offline, we can always just pause the recording and ask the more personal questions off the record as well. We'll have this as Channing House rules as well, so that everyone can feel more open about it. So before we begin, a little bit about Albert's. So Albert Impact Ventures is a fund run by Albert's family. Albert's have been around for nearly 140 years, so quite a while. Started off as entrepreneurs themselves, selling sheet music, musical instruments. They also did made the ABC radio station, sold that to the government. Then they went into music publishing, where they backed AC/DC and the Easy Beats. So you might have heard of some of those. In 2016, they closed the music publishing business, but decided to stay in business as a family, to keep backing Australian and New Zealand pioneers, and to really focus on having a positive impact. So that led to a few things. We became a B Corp, the Tony Foundation, which focuses on music education, and Albert Impact Ventures, which focuses on early stage investing across 4 impact themes. Before impact themes, we look at the environment, given that's a relevant topic here. Within that, we look at sustainable cities, healthy food and water, the circular economy, and also reducing CO2. The other three areas we look at are mental health and wellbeing, a vibrant culture, and equality with an initial focus on gender. So what we look for is pre-seed, seed, Series A, right from the start. And we try and work in public as much as possible to be transparent for founders. So this is, another step in that direction to be open about what kind of things investors look for. In terms of being impact investors, it's a little bit different from a typical investor. So typical investors just look at commercial returns. For us, impact is also absolutely critical. So we need to have unanimous agreement that the company is achieving a positive impact in one of those themes. So for us, the biggest reason you'll be rejected is your business is not having impact in one of those 4 areas. Or we think there could be bad second order or third order effects from what you're building. So for us, that's really critical. Commercially, we're actually happy to have disagreement. You definitely need someone to be your champion and think that you're going to be the next unicorn. We look for venture returns, just like other VC funds. We don't think it comes at a compromise to impact. In fact, we think some of the brightest minds tend to work on some of the world's biggest problems. So we think there's a good correlation for returns there. What I might do is start by talking through, I'll talk through our process, and I might share my screen, or maybe not for this one, I'll share my screen later, but I'll share a link to where I'm looking at this if anyone wants to look at this later. So we try and be as public as possible in our process and steps to be clear to founders. You might find other VCs or impact funds also share parts of their process. So I would really encourage you, if you're presenting to an investor, to look on their website and see what they have available, because it can be really big hints. So for us, and for a typical sophisticated investor, this is a little bit of what the process looks like from the other side. So the first step is screening. So you have a sense of that. We'll see over 400 deals a year. That's a lot of companies. A lot of these are really quick screens. What we're looking for here is making sure that companies are having impact in those theme areas, are the right stage, and don't look too spivvy. So that's sort of step one. If you get through that, you'll likely get asked to have a first meeting. These are really quick 30-minute meetings just to get to know you, hear out your why, and learn more about your business. If you progress through that, you'll go, in our process, you'll go to a management meeting and meet the whole team. Then you'll go to investment committee. Throughout those steps, there'll be different levels of due diligence. That could include specific questions, looking at your financial model, asking for a data room. And if all that goes well, you'll be presented with a term sheet, or you might have a different lead who presents a term sheet, and we would, sign and agree to other terms. Then you go into legal due diligence, which is a little bit of to and fro on legal terms. And then finally, you get your cash and you're onboarded. Obviously, there's dropouts at each of those stages, but they're kind of the basic steps in terms of getting sophisticated investor money. So you'll meet someone on the team, you'll meet more of a team, you'll eventually get to investment committee, and along the way, you'll get a lot of questions. In terms of how to put yourself in your best shoes for that, you sort of want to think at each step, what can you do best? So in terms of screening, most VCs, including us, will generally screen on your investor deck. So if that's generally your first impression with a venture capital firm or any investor, it's typically 10 to 20 slides on your business to summarize why you're doing what you're doing, why it's going to change your world, and why it should be backed. There are some questions which investors want answered from this. And if you don't answer them, you might not pass the screening process. Or if you answer them in a way which doesn't make too much sense for that type of investor, you might also get pulled. You might also not get it to the first meeting. So one thing I've done ahead of this is actually made a sort of dummy presentation on what a pitch deck could look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through that in about 5 minutes. And in this pitch deck, what I've tried to do is point out what would be in a good pitch deck and what some common pitfalls might be for founders in their pitch deck. So what are things which might not get you to that first meeting? So what I might do is share my screen and walk you guys through that. As I go along, please feel free to jump in with questions. There'll be plenty of time at the end, but if you've got questions or feedback.
Do love the name, Lisa.
So is this still in draft mode? You're getting a demo view. This will be a blog and publicly available, but you're getting the sort of the precursor view of this deck of a future con. So basically, your first slide doesn't really need to say much other than what your company's called. And maybe just don't overcrowd it. the first thing you need to say in your deck is then talking about what the problem is. Why are we here? Like, what are we even solving? In climate startups, it's often, global warming is a problem, or maybe a specific part of the value chain is broken, or maybe meat is the 4 biggest contributor to CO2. What problem are we solving here? So your investor is going to look at that problem and be like, I agree or I disagree. And they're also going to look at this and be like, okay, is this a big enough problem affecting enough people? And that's sort of the questions they're asking when they're looking at this slide. The next thing is, okay, problem, what's your solution? So your solution needs to make sense. Generally, a simpler solution works better than a really convoluted one. It needs to, have logical unit economics. Capital isn't infinite, and generally, it needs to also solve a problem. Occasionally, you'll see a deck where someone has a problem and then a solution which doesn't really make sense for that problem. It's sort of solving a different problem. So if it's a little bit more complicated, you need to walk your investor through why your solution does solve that problem. These are all dummy things for a hypothetical company. So obviously these numbers are not real. The next thing that you will often see in a pitch deck is the market. So particularly for venture investors, the market needs to be large enough. How venture investors make their returns is choosing companies that become the next unicorns, things that go up 10x, 100 times, become billion-dollar businesses, or even 100 million if you're coming in at a low valuation is, a really good return. So to do that, normally you need to sell to millions of people. So does your problem affect millions of people? Are there thousands of customers that are going to pay a bigger bill for that? So this is about, okay, well, is the market large enough? And then, beyond that market, is there an obvious, really niche target market that you can really dominate? So when you have a really big problem, often there's a lot of competition and lots of people competing at it. And if you've got a solution which targets a particular niche more effectively, you're able to win and dominate that space better. So what I normally recommend when I mentor is to have sort of cascading circles for something around the market. So you'll have your target addressable market of, blue sky, what's everyone who's competing in your space going to reach? Then you have your serviceable addressable market, which is realistically, what do you think you're going to get to? So maybe that might be, that might be global. This might be Australia is really where you're focused. And then you have the serviceable market, the current market. So this is where your current resources, you have a market. So maybe you have, a wait list of people who you can convert. So this is the low hanging fruit of who you're going to get immediately. So sort of walking an investor through that makes a more realistic plan. Essentially what an investor will do with this is be like, okay, from that TAM, I only think 10% is really realistic. And from that serviceable addressable market, maybe you get a third of a market share and they choose what they think is realistic. And then they look at this last one and be like, oh, well, okay, can they really get that soon? Is that really low hanging fruit? So the more you can help investors answer those questions, the more helpful this slide is going to be towards getting you that first meeting. Next, you have traction. Now, we've made 2 demo slides for traction. The first one is for a business which is generating revenue. If you're generating revenue, talk about your revenue. Show what's happening. So it might not be a straight hockey stick. Great if it is. It might have a bump. If there's a bump, annotate it. Tell us what's gone wrong. Maybe there's a reason why, maybe your supplies were being held up. Is this something which is going to be recurring? Maybe it's a cyclical business. Often businesses have different months where they earn more. So if you've got not a straight path, which most businesses will not have, just explain what's happening in your graph. Look at mention what the growth rate is.
Oh, Lisa, I thought I'd just ask a question there. Is this a thing as a investor, when you look at a traction chart that looks a little too perfect, are you dubious of it? Like, is it good to actually show the sort of warts and all story?
I love warts and all stories. I think warts and all stories show me more about the founder's resilience and the way they think. No unicorn got here without nearly dying. All of them have had horrible pitfalls along the way, and having some of those early on in your journey and taking the right lessons from them and failing fast and learning and pivoting and fixing that are really good signs, particularly in really early stages. One of your biggest advantages is being nimble and being able to pivot and change your path. So being open about that is definitely helpful. Very rarely do you see just up and to the right charts. Sometimes that does happen. If that is the case, that's great. Maybe look at a point in your graph where there's an inflection point, and then you can talk to, oh, here we learned that improving our SEO strategy gave us more traction, or here we had a new marketing hire, and you can see what that impacted. So you might have positive things in your chart to talk about as well. So yeah, that's sort of a little bit of a traction chart if you've got revenue. You might not have revenue. If you don't have revenue, you still want to talk about traction. In which case, this is more like proof points, and sometimes people call this proof points. Things you might include on that. This kind of a slide will be, your presence, your PR, things you've been in, if you've got any IP, what patents you have, if you have a wait list, how many people on it, and maybe companies you're partnered with, like, the generic company ABC. So that sort of ways, essentially what you're trying to do with this slide is build trust. This is the kind of thing which you're telling your customers, your future customers are going to be paying you revenue, be like, you should trust us because we've got this. You should trust us because we've got patents. Like, this is verified data. You should trust us because University of Sydney is working with us, or the government's given us a grant. Like, these are proof points I've made, or there's 1,000 other people on the wait list with you, so you're not alone. So this is proof points before you might have your revenue. And if you're pitching at sort of that point where you're just starting to make your first revenue, you might still want to include this as well. So if, let's say you've only had your product live for 3 months, that's not really a lot of data for your revenue, so you might still have a sort of proof point slide. Next, go to market. Now, this is not what, I haven't seen this in every single pitch deck. Sometimes this is in the data room, but you will be asked about your go to market at some point by investors. We've included it in our presentation. Essentially, there'll be different, we want to have a think about, we want to see how you're thinking about growing your business. We want to see, is it logical in terms of how ambitious you are in terms of going overseas? Are you thinking about it in stages? Are you thinking about partnerships? There's rarely right and wrong answers, and there's certainly a whole sphere of, there's companies where one company's right is another company's wrong, and vice versa. What we want to see here is the logic and reasons for why you've chosen your go-to-market strategy. We want to know that you haven't just pulled it out of a hat. We want to know that you've chosen to do partnerships because it makes sense for your business because of ABC. After partnerships, you're going to do X, Y, Z. Maybe you have a sense of it'll take us about 6 months to do partnerships, etc. So that's sort of what we're looking for there. Competition. We've kind of got two visualizations here of how we often see the slides. So sometimes there's a table, which miraculously always has your company first, ticking all the boxes. Interestingly, you get to choose the boxes that to be ticked. And then you have your competitors. Or sometimes you choose two axes of, what's important. Maybe there's price, maybe there's impact, maybe there's different features, but you choose essentially two of these features and you map yourself and others. You can also do different sizes if you want to have a third axis. And essentially what you're saying is, where is a white space that you are playing in? Does your company have a need to exist? How does it feel a need that's not already serviced by the competitors in this space? Some common mistakes here are, if you have a known competitor, make sure it's on the slide. It's a bit of a red flag if I'm looking at your business and there's a clear, obvious competitor and you've not included it there, because I want you to be teaching me things on this. You should know more about your space than I do, because I'm looking at 400 deals. You're looking at one thing specifically. So you should know more about this than me. And you should address head on and be ready to answer questions on why you're different to your key competitor. Why is there a reason for your business to exist? Why are people going to choose you over the others? Could be price. Could be that you're faster. Could be that you service, there's more value in the product you're doing. Cool. Then there's team. Make sure you put your founders on it. Put a little bit of information about them. Something which I find a little bit helpful, and we'll probably adjust the slide a little bit to have that. You might have a coming soon. You might be raising this fund to hire someone, and you might put what you're looking for in that person. So sometimes it's useful to say, who you have, or I really know I need a CTO, and this is who I want. So if you've got a clear gap, maybe address it with a, coming soon.
Lisa, can I just, Alberts has been an absolute champion in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and like 53% of your portfolio has female founders. When you look at a team slide, when it's all one demographic, is that something that's important too when you look at the makeup of the team?
For us, it is. So for us, diversity and inclusion is vertical and horizontal. If you have, we have about a third in terms of mixed founders, all female, all male. So we try and reduce as much bias as we can. I love it when there's mixed teams. I love it when there's mixed management, because you have more diversity of thought. And there's a lot of statistics to say that tends to be a more successful business. That said, sometimes when you've got a company with 3 people, those 3 people are probably going to share some demographic characteristics, especially if they've known each other for 10 years and been thinking about this for a while. What we look at is, what advisors did you put around yourself? Did you go out of your way to make sure you have at least one diverse person that you're talking to? And we will often, if we see only a single demographic, and this happens for all male and all female, we will ask the same question. We'll ask, okay, how do you think about diversity hiring? Are you worried about creating a culture which will make it harder for the other gender and other demographic to enter? And we ask them about how they think about hiring there, and we ask them to understand how much of a focus that is. There's a lot of studies to say, basically who your first 10 and 20 employees are, that demographic is going to basically be the company culture. So if you only have, if you don't make a concerted effort to make sure you have diversity from the start, it only becomes harder. It seems like it's easier at the start, but it's not. It's a lot easier to do it then than it is later. So it's also something which we often lean in on, and we sort of have a conversation with founders like, hey, have you thought of talking to these networks? Have you thought of reaching out to other demographics in this way or that way? So sometimes there's just a learning curve there. If a founder said that they have no intention of hiring a diverse team, that would be a big red flag for us. But sometimes when you've only got 2 to 5 people in your company, sometimes it just lands that way. And as long as it's a focus of the future, that's fine. Cool. Financials. So this is a chance to bring up anything you're morally proud of. You should talk about some of your unit economics. You should talk about your growth rate for revenue, your CAC to LTV, essentially what we want to see here is, does your business make sense? For every dollar you put in, how many dollars are you getting out? This needs to make sense long term. What are you raising? What are you spending it on? So if you don't know what you're spending it on, you shouldn't be raising. You should have a clear plan for the money that you're raising. You're raising money to do an outcome, to reach growth targets, to hire certain people. Why dilute if you're not going to do that? And why not give the transparency to investors for where you're planning on spending it? What's really good about thinking this through is it also means that, let's say you want to raise 2 mil, but you only end up with 1. You can be really clear about, well, that additional 1 gets me to put, a resource in the UK and expand there. And that's something I wanted to do. But if we don't get to the 2 mil, it's just going to be focused on Australia for now. So you can be really clear on how much more de-risking or growth you can get for a bigger raise. Red flags here would be, well, it depends on stage. At the start, most VCs like a lot of, R&D, tech, product people. And once you've got product market fit, you should be putting more money into sales and your growth engine. Most of your costs generally should be people, unless you are doing something deep tech, in which case it makes sense that you might have some legal costs or some capital expenses coming up. So again, it's different depending on the business you're doing. But in general, upfront, you need to spend a little bit of that. I really recommend a book, Lean Startup, all about trying to do things on a shoestring budget at the start. It's easier to misspend a small amount of money than a big amount of money. So figure out how you can test any hypothesis for the least amount possible. Companies tend to do better on shoestring budgets early on because it keeps them nimble. If you've spent 5 mil on a strategy which doesn't work out, that's a lot harder a conversation with your investors than if you spent 500K on a strategy and you've learned a lot of things to say, actually, we need to go left. So you want to be making those lessons as cheaply as possible. Finally, make sure you put your contact details in. That's it. We've kept this really short. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'd really love to get some questions from people. Happy to talk through any of the slides there. Happy to talk through, anything you want, basically. If you've got specific questions on your business, I'm also happy to share. I'll send a link here. In addition to that, we've also just got a bunch of resources we make for founders, like how to do your model 101. This pitch deck will be part of that series in terms of how to prepare for investors, because it is really opaque and can be scary. And this is trying to make it a little bit less scary.
Absolutely. And Lisa, you're such a wonderful, generous mentor to the community as well. Hank had a question. I think he's raised his hand. Hank, do you want to come off mic and ask? I think Yeah, go.
I just realized my video is off. Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for that. I wanted to ask if I can quickly share the link to my pitch deck. I've just started the fundraising journey.
Yeah,
I'll give you the link so that you can drive it and so that I don't hold up everybody with over expanding anything. But I thought I'd just give it to you as if you got it blind, and would love just your out loud thoughts.
Okay, warts and all.
Warts and all, absolutely.
Right.
I'm going to paste the link.
Do you want us to pause record, or do you want us to?
I'm happy with it. It's I don't, if somebody goes and completely steals the idea and they do a better job than I am, then the world will be a better place, in my opinion. So I'm happy to have it recorded.
Okay, I'll share my screen so you guys can see side by side reaction and deck. Okay. Find sales laws. Okay, makes sense. Explains what it does. Oh, I like starting with, also you can mix up the deck in your order. So present things how it makes sense for you. So I think it's good starting with the founder. That's good. You've got your trust points there that you've said, companies you're working with. One thing which goes to my mind when you say that is, firstly, okay, good, big, strong, trusted brands. But how real is that relationship? Is that just a conversation? Is that a partnership? What's that look like? So that's something in my mind. Net positive seeing that, but that's sort of a question I've got. Cool. Next slide. Cool. Yeah, that's a problem. Commercial agriculture. Hang on.
Yeah, and just to, this has kind of been designed more as a presentation deck
Yeah.
with a talking track. And I think it just, as you were showing yours, I went, I probably need to go a little bit more text to explain what I'm saying there.
Yeah, look, I like that you've got minimalist, not overcrowded slides. Sometimes when founders, I do more of those ones, they might have, more than a 20-slide presentation, but maybe like an extra slide which looks like this but has text appearing on it or something, so that you can sort of create that walkthrough as a desktop experience. I'm looking at the slide and I'm confused.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I think you've anticipated.
Yeah.
Okay. What if? That sounds nice. How do we do it? Okay. Oh, interesting. How do you make it a status symbol? Why will it be sold for profit? Okay, I can see the benefit of this, but then when I'm thinking about when you say this, I'm like, oh, this is a bit complicated because you kind of need to make a marketplace to do that. So then I'm starting to think, okay, does your team have the expertise to build a marketplace? And do you have someone advising on the legal side on, is this going to be a security? You would have seen some of the issues that blockchain is having around that. So, how do you trade that? So that's sort of a question which goes to my head to, okay, let's have a look at team and see if that pops up. Customer survey results. How many squares would you buy? How many people did you survey? Would be a question.
Just a few dozen, so a fairly small survey.
Cool. Maybe do a little footnote or something like that. That can be a good way of sort of adding that little bit of information.
Okay.
Yeah, this is it's interesting, but it really depends on, if there's only a couple of dozen, that's not too many. So it's still there's not enough to prove product market fit. It's still very sort of early data points for what you're doing is sort of what I'd conclude from this one. Yeah,
and that was very much like taking that lean startup approach, do a little bit of a survey, then do a little bit of a prototype, then do but that was the early starting point.
And this is really good for showing transparency, but it also sort of sets, in my head, this is probably the first slide I've seen in here, but I'm like, okay, now I know what stage this business is at. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, cool. So we are pre-product market fit. We are at we've got the real problem, the real idea. Need to have a look at the team's got the right skill sets for that solution, but it's still early in that journey. Direct sales. Okay. Scale through partners. Partners are good. I love partners. They're great for startups at the start. For most startups, fundraising through donations is expensive. Agreed with that. When you're pitching to impact investors, this point will resonate with most of them, because philanthropy, really hard to solve all our biggest problems of just philanthropy. There's just not enough capital there. So driving returns is necessary. Okay. I'm still looking for proof points on how it's going to show revenue growth and how you're going to achieve that and how you're going to clear that as like security or something. Okay, so you're taking like a commission. Okay, kind of makes sense. Recommendations.
Wow, it's a lot of slides.
This is, how many slides are there? Look, 10 to 20 is quite normal. Oh, you did exactly what I suggested in terms of the breaking down the segments. So I'm looking at this. Okay, 28. Oh, okay, this is interesting. I've got some comments on the slide.
I thought you might.
You sort of got it written here a little bit in terms of the global carbon market is $1 trillion. So if I were you, I'd almost be trying to make that your biggest TAM. And then say that deforestation is the first target of what you're doing, because it doesn't have to be deforestation. I'm sure that you could also do this potentially for marine life and corals.
That's right.
or other areas. So, within all of the global carbon market, you're targeting deforestation, and then within deforestation, there's a segment here.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe one of the questions, if I can ask there, Lisa, it's that when I start crunching the numbers on some of these problems, because the problem is so big, and if you start finding revenue within it, the amounts of money we're talking about are in the trillions.
yes.
And I've almost shied away from putting the dollar figures down, because I'd almost expect people to go, no, that's ridiculous. There can't be that much money in saving the environment. So I've been somewhat wary about putting some of the numbers out there and almost minimizing what the potential market actually is, because I'm afraid that it would just blow people's minds.
Yeah, so firstly, anyone in the climate space has probably already had their mind blown several times by these figures.
Yeah.
I think, and this is, my perspective, other investors might think of this differently. So, and this is how I see it. I think in a way, when you say the whole target market, like it's not bad to go too big and let the investor decide for themselves what portion of that is realistic. So like I said, when I was going through mine, like when I look at the target addressable market, I don't really mind if it's huge, but I'll just be like, look, realistically, only 20% of that's going to go conservation, or maybe 10%. But they're sort of letting me make that decision.
Gotcha.
If you are cutting the data, pre-cutting it yourself, the investor's still going to want to be conservative, but you're sort of making that cut happen twice. Where it does pay to be more specific is on that really inner circle of this is what I'm targeting first. And maybe that is, Australian deforestation, accessible land. And maybe you've mapped that out and you're like, look, this is how much it is Australia. This is going to be my focus for the next 2-3 years. So that's something which okay, cool, tangibly, I can test that number. Ideally, you'd put some calculations into how you got to that number. But the really big TAM number, I basically never believe it. But what I want to see is there a market that the right founder can keep navigating and keep growing? So eventually, is it big enough that it's a blue ocean? And you also have the initial really early target. So what you've done here is a lot on the early target. I wouldn't be afraid to do a blue sky what this type could be. And maybe you become just deforestation and competitors come in and do marine life. But if there's a big market, it's more competition can also be good, because then you have to explain your asset less.
Thank you.
So I think you can tell the story more to your advantage on this slide.
Right, thank you.
Why now? Why now is a good slide. I thought of putting that in a demo deck. I think it's really useful. A lot of things is timing. And I think I've heard a lot of people say that whilst the economy is contracting in a lot of ways. People are still investing in climate. So it's a good point to say, particularly for non-climate investors, to remind them of that. Oh, it's interesting that you say this as competition and potential partners. I think this needs a bit more explanation.
Okay.
Like BrickX is quite different to what you're doing.
Yeah, and I kind of just put it up there as a trigger for people. Oh, fractionalization has happened in a different sector. It's a potential partner in terms of maybe technology that can be adapted if we were to work with somebody like that who's already piggybacking on I think they've got their own financial services license. So I could piggyback on that. So that was thinking to say, yep, they're not really competition, the potential partner. But I hear what you're saying in terms of explain it a little bit better on the slide itself.
Yeah, and I'd almost, competition potential partners is almost a bit different. I'm sort of thinking back to this first slide where you've got these. I'm like, oh, okay, who are these? Is that your experience? Is sort
experience
of
former employers? Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So I'm sort of thinking, maybe potential partners maybe have categories of other fractionalized owners, conservatory groups or charities, and then you have competition, maybe other charities, maybe a few things like that. Like I think they're a little bit different.
Gotcha. Okay.
Square by Square made its first sale. Oh, congratulations. And Valfood's a good one. Cool. This is the go-to-market.
Yeah.
Might take a bit longer than 6 months to finalize regulatory registrations. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, does this fit in this timeline? When I'm looking at those data points.
It depends. If ASIC was a little bit quicker to reply to my emails.
Yeah, so it's a different type of asset class which can take a bit longer. The other thing I look at when I'm looking at this is, okay, so do the timeframes make sense? And do you have the right resources around you to do that? So one thing which I think is missing here is a team slide of who you're bringing on board for some of those. So some of those questions I had a bit unanswered for, regulatory people. You've got a lot of tech things here, so you'd need someone there. So I'd probably put a people or a hiring slide. If it's just you at the moment, you might say, I need a CTO and I need a lawyer. Show that you're thinking of that. You might even have someone in mind. That's great. If not, say what kind of experience you're after them, and put in like a dummy. Adding another slide is starting to get this a bit long. So either think of pulling something or flip to having an appendix section. So for example, partners would probably be an appendix because it's like hypothetical partners. Or things in appendix you can also put in your data room. So you want a very neat, tidy story at the start, and then you can put things through later. But overall, this is really clear. Good size. I think you've done really well on the stack. I think there's a few low-hanging fruit things you can do to help open those doors. And I think also admire you for sharing this with everyone, and thank you for being open about your deck so your peers can learn and push forward in this. So
right, thank you.
Pleasure. And if you've got more questions, feel free to reach out.
Right, thank you, Lisa.
Pleasure.
I've got a quick question, Lisa, if I may. So I'm addressing multiple problems. So I'm reinventing air conditioning to make comfort sustainable. And so the problem that maybe investors are interested in is probably going to be a different problem than what a customer may buy. So which one do I stress? So for an investor, perhaps we're going to have a bigger impact in terms of decarbonising. but maybe the customer may buy it because I'm going to improve their comfort and save their energy bill. So which do we just highlight which one, multiple ones?
So this is still a mainstream opinion, but sometimes a little controversial. I don't think it should be controversial. Fundamentally, you should be supporting your people and your customers. So some people say shareholders at the start. That's basically you. At the end of the day, the best source of cash flow is from your customers. You should be solving a problem for customers with a solution that fits customers, and you should find investors that understand that. If you are solving for whatever an investor tells you or advises you, you're not super focused on the customer needs, and you will go astray. Because essentially the customer won't buy it. I mean, you'll always need investor capital. So if you take that into extreme, you'll always be raising because you're not actually solving the right problem. What ideally you want to do with your business is get to a point where investor capital is great and I can use this to turbocharge growth, but I don't need it. I'm earning everything I need from my customers. I can keep growing the way I'm growing. They are making my business sustainable. And if I want to go faster, or I want to hire someone, or I want to go overseas, maybe I'll raise some capital, especially in this type of market where valuations are really a lot tighter and people are focused on that. So definitely prioritize your customers. What you should do in your deck is also make it clear. I love it when a founder tells me, I have had these engagements with customers, I'm really deep getting to know them, and here are my insights about the customers and why my product is like this. So, like this is impact, but the reason I am able to sell it to customers is because it's cheap or because it's comfort. So that is how I drive revenue here, and I will get impact as a result of that. But they're the things I need to focus on to actually have the biggest impact. Because if you don't have sales, you don't have any impact.
Yep, that's good. Thanks.
Awesome.
Lisa, I was going to ask you, because so many investors say they invest in the founder, not the deck or even the solution. So what are is there red flags or is there green flags that you look for when you're speaking to that founder?
Yeah, hang on, I have a checklist for this too.
It's like I know.
Here's one I put together. So we've made a sort of founder checklist. So it goes through some of the things we've talked through in terms of the deck and things, but also some of the points we're looking for in founders. I'll just speak to it more generally. So some things that we look for is resilience, integrity. There's no point backing someone who you can't believe what they're saying, because you just there's no point. You're gonna be scammed at some point. So this is why it's good to show what's at all. Because one thing which is a really big red flag if I'm doing work on you and then I found out that something was not truthful, that's I start to question everything else, and that makes it really hard to get to a yes. So having integrity, having resilience, having capability. So this is a lot about founder market fit. Do you have the right skills to solve this problem? Do you make sense here? Why are you doing this? Your why, sort of how do I know that you're going to stick around for this for the next 10 years when things get rough? What's your motivation here? What are you in this for? And then compelling. That one's a bit more of an ace, and it's a little bit about, it can be charisma, it can be world-leading intellect in this sphere. It could be a knack for marketing, or just something which is special to your team. Why are you compelling for this? So yeah, integrity, capability, compelling, resilience. This is an unusual red flag, but if you've never had a failure or you can't talk to a failure, that's a bit of a red flag because you're going to fail in the process. So I want people, I actually think founders that have had hardships, it's great because you know how to deal with them when things get rough. Other things which are good is getting a strong team around you. For me, the biggest red flag is if you can't keep a good team around you or hire. And that comes through in a lot of ways. I wrote a big blog about this called The Anatomy of a Company. And I sort of dissect a company down to as if it's a human body. And I make sort of an analogy to like the spirit and the culture and how to diagnose if there's an issue with that. And one of the biggest tells is people just keep leaving, or you have you hold equity so tightly and you're not able to attract senior people. So the best leaders know that they can't achieve their best potential on their own, and they fundamentally are there to back the people and to get the people around them to scale the business. There's not a single person who's going to solve global warming. This is going to be a thing which takes many people, lots of cooperation. Chief Executive Officer, you're in charge of the people. So how you interact with those people, how you attract top talent, why people want to work for you. One of my favorite things to ask founders is, I'll talk to their employees. I'll ask, like, if someone's just been hired in, I'll ask them what was unexpected. What do they like? What do they not like about the organization? So yeah, generally staying true to your mission. Also, people who, another thing which can be a bit hard is if someone's doing it like, I just wanted to be a founder and I was just looking for something to do. That's not a very strong motivation. If there's something which really drives you to the mission of the company, that's a lot stronger. So a lot of the time, the mission and the purpose of the founder becomes sort of the mission and purpose of the company and translates that through. So when that's strong, the founder's going to stay around through thick and thin. See a question.
Hi, yeah, I was just, given the current fundraising environment, I hear it's taking a lot longer to raise a round. What's the runway you recommend raising for, just given that?
Yeah, I recommend raising for at least 2 years, but ideally what we're recommending for founders is, if you can, this isn't possible for all startups. So big asterisks, if you're a deep tech and you need lots of years to actually bring your product to market, this does not apply to you. If you're doing a B2B SaaS, if you're doing something which has sales immediately, ideally what you want is to do this raise with the ability to break even. So you want to raise capital now to put your company in position that capital is then optional. That doesn't mean you're probably not going to raise, but it means that when you raise, you're saying, I'm raising for growth. I'm raising to get marketing people. I'm raising to make this new product. So that way, if things get rough in the next 2 to 3 years and it's still hard, it doesn't matter. You're fine. You don't have to take a down round. You don't have to close shop. You're in a position where you can wait. You can stay in the stealth mode, or you can raise and do growth. So that's the strongest position to put yourself in, if that's accessible. Like I said, that asterisk, it's not accessible for everyone. If you're making a really complicated technology, sometimes that takes a while, and you need to find investors that have that longer term vision. At least cover yourself for 2 years and make sure you're going with partners who understand that that Rome wasn't built overnight. Daniel?
Hi, Lisa. Thanks very much for all this. A question I always wonder is in your experience, if a founder has what is a material portion, or what puts you off, or what's immaterial when it comes to dedicating salaries to the founders themselves when it comes to the raise itself? It's always interesting to understand various opinions on this. And keep yours.
That's a good question. again, depends. What does it depend on? Firstly, it depends on stage of business. Secondly, it depends on the life circumstance of a founder. If a founder has 3 kids, they're probably not going to be able to go on a 50K salary for as long as someone who's 20 years old out of uni. They might have different needs and they might still take a lower salary, but maybe they need at least 100K to make that work in their family. It needs to be an amount which makes sense for, their experience. You're not going, what would be a red flag is if you're doing, say, a $500,000 raise and you want to pay yourself 200K, that's a bit of a red flag. One thing which is a green flag on salaries is when a founder is able to pay someone who's not themselves a higher salary than theirs. So often I'll see a CTO salary higher than a founder salary, especially early on, because you've got equity and that person's important and you're happy to pay them what their market worth is to keep them there. That's a really good green flag for me that you're going to be focused on. That key question, which I mentioned at the start, is about the people and being able to attract those people. It also depends on how much equity you have, which is again related to the stage of a business too. So when you are later down the track, you probably have less equity. So you should be getting a higher salary because you've probably diluted as you've gone along. Once your business is break even or earning money, you can justify salary increases. What I think is a mature approach to founder salary would be in the financial model, putting in pay rises, perhaps linked to rounds or perhaps linked to revenue targets. So say maybe initially you go on a really low salary when you're a pre-seed, you just got an idea like, look, I just need 50K to eat. And then maybe once you've hit the mil ARR, you're like, great, I'll go on 120 or 150. And then once you actually get to 10 mil revenue, then you go on to a more CEO style salary. So it's very reasonable to have salary increases. And it's also the last thing you'd want is a founder who is so stressed about money that they can't focus on the business. So there's a balancing point and it depends on the circumstance and depends on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jan, did you want to quickly ask your question? We maybe have time for one more. Oh, is he still on? No, there he is.
I'm here. I'm just in a noisy spot, so I've been texting my messages. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One of them is it for you as Alberts in this climate space, is it harder for you to get money to invest at the moment? Are you investing as much now as you were, let's say, last year?
We're investing more now than before. We think this is a great time to invest. It's more bespoke on different deals.
Okay, well, that's a good answer. Feels great. What else did I ask? I have to look through my questions.
Unfortunately, I have to give the spot up. So I might have to call it there and just say a huge thank you to everyone. Hopefully that's been really helpful. If anyone has follow-up questions, you're welcome to reach back out.
Lisa, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And this was off the back of a conversation like, investors should be helping with what to look for from investors. So it was really great to hear it from your wonderful wisdom to help our founders go further. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And please join us on Thursday for perspectives about going global with KPMG, same time and online. See you later.